Whispering pines huddled beneath a pristine shroud of snow, a picture postcard of holiday perfection, deceptively untouched by time. Garlands of glittering Christmas lights festooned every roofline and doorway, their kaleidoscopic hues painting the icy paths below. But beneath this veneer of cheer, a disquieting hum resonated, a murmur of secrets slithering out from the depths of the town's history. Each twinkling bulb seemed to strain against an encroaching darkness, a feeble defense against the shadows conjured by stories long buried, yet never truly forgotten. The very air, sharp and cold enough to slice, carried whispers darker than the December night. Each breath drawn felt thick with the remnants of ancient tales, echoes of laughter and lament that no longer danced or wept in the village square. Children, bundled in coats of vibrant colors, filled the streets with bursts of innocent merriment, their voices a fleeting melody against the underlying stillness. Yet encircling the village, the brooding forest stood sentinel, a stark reminder of a history etched as deep into the pines as the sap that bled eternally within their wooden hearts. The December wind rustled through the trees, carrying secrets that yearned to break free from their arboreal prison. As dusk bled into night, the festive lights lost their cheery glow, taking on a more sinister aspect. The warm hues of day surrendered to creeping shadows that stretched and distorted familiar shapes, transforming corners and recesses into lurking threats. Alleys became chasms of darkness where ordinary objects shed their benign identities, morphing into monstrous figments of adolescent dread. The ghostly glow of street lamps, perched precariously at the edge of the encroaching woods, offered only a flickering solace, a futile attempt to hold back the encroaching wildness and the relentless march of time. Within the snug homes, crackling fires and the semblance of comfort masked a deeper unease. The warmth was a fragile shield against the persistent, arthritic grip of the cold, ever ready to seep in through cracks of neglect. Distant carols, sung with a disquieting undercurrent of sadness, hung in the air like phantom melodies, clinging to those who listened closely enough to hear the sorrow woven into the notes. At the heart of Whispering Pines, like a disinterested deity or perhaps a forgotten elder, stood the ancient church. Its spire, a skeletal finger pointing accusingly at the heavens, seemed to lament a paradise lost. Primordial hymns seeped through its stone walls, mingling with the wind that carried both solace and secrets. By day, the wooden pews offered a place of rest and communion. By night, they groaned beneath the weight of memories and phantoms, etching unsettling paths into the minds of those who lingered too long, witnesses to revelations unbidden. This ethereal atmosphere permeated Whispering Pines, blurring the line between the tangible and the spectral. Families, huddled within their homes, observed ancient rituals against the encroaching night, their actions as old as the shadows beneath their feet. Evergreen wreaths adorned their doors, hand-dipped candles flickered with unspoken meaning, and talismans, emblems of both faith and fear, dangled like fragile promises. These were the vestiges of bygone eras, desperate attempts to ward off the specters lurking just beyond the veil of perception. The return to Whispering Pines sharpened memories like shards of ice. Nostalgia, a double-edged sword of comfort and dread, prowled the edges of consciousness. The village itself stood as a monument to what was lost, every creaking board and whispering gust a lament for bygone days. As familiar faces became unsettling masks of the past, the fragile boundary between memory and reality blurred, transforming the village into a stage for a drama of broken promises and fractured ties. It was into this unsettling tableau that Clara Thompson and Eli Carter stepped, each carrying their own baggage of past and present, unknowingly drawn into the chilling embrace of Whispering Pines. The deceptive tranquility of Whispering Pines, with its snow-laden charm and festive veneer, was about to be pierced. New arrivals, drawn by forces beyond the lure of holiday cheer, were stepping onto the stage of this unsettling tableau. Their presence, like stones dropped into a still pond, would ripple outwards, disturbing the town's carefully crafted illusion of normalcy. Clara Thompson stepped off the wheezing bus. The frigid air, a physical manifestation of the icy grip Whispering Pines held on her past. This wasn't a homecoming fueled by nostalgia. It was a reckoning. The town, cloaked in its deceptive holiday garb, mirrored the secrets she carried, the ghosts of her family's history clinging to her like the frost clinging to the pines. Clara, a psychiatrist accustomed to dissecting the human psyche, felt a profound unease, a sense of being observed, not by the townsfolk, but by something older, something woven into the very fabric of Whispering Pines. The festive cheer felt forced, a thin veil over a simmering darkness. The smiles of the residents seemed strained, their eyes holding a flicker of something trapped, something desperate. Clara, armed with her analytical mind, knew the shadows here were not simply metaphors. They were real, visceral, and waiting. Eli Carter, a whirlwind of restless energy, arrived in Whispering Pines like a rogue element in a carefully calibrated experiment. The town's stillness chafed against his inherent dynamism. A fallen star in the world of professional sports, his once bright future had been extinguished by a cruel twist of fate. Now stranded in this snow-covered purgatory, he sought answers, a flicker of understanding in the face of his shattered dreams. The town, with its veiled secrets and unspoken resentments, mirrored his own inner turmoil, the hollowness of unfulfilled potential. The younger residents, still clinging to the fading embers of his athletic glory, saw in him a reflection of their own aspirations and fears. Eli, a paradox of local hero and spectral outsider, felt the town's silent judgment, a pressure that bore down on him, not physical, but psychological, a challenge to his very being. And then there were the Yule Haunts, neither fully of this world nor entirely separate from it. They were the town's ancient guardians, figures of folklore given chilling life, their power drawn from the darkest recesses of Whispering Pines history. They existed in the liminal spaces, the blurred edges between celebration and dread, their motives as enigmatic as the swirling mists that cloaked the town at night. They were the keepers of tradition, the enforcers of ancient rites, their presence a constant reminder that the festive cheer masked a deeper, more unsettling truth. They were the embodiment of the town's secrets, the whispers in the wind, the shadows that danced in the flickering lamplight. Within their spectral ranks, unseen battles for dominance raged, their conflicts mirroring the town's own fractured identity. The Yule Haunts were the guardians, the gatekeepers, and perhaps the key to understanding the darkness that clung to Whispering Pines. Their presence was a palpable force, a chilling reminder that the veil between worlds was thin, especially during the long, dark nights of winter. The frigid air of Whispering Pines hit Clara like a physical blow as she stepped off the wheezing bus, the diesel fumes a fleeting, acrid counterpoint to the crisp scent of pine and snow. The Yuletide decorations, vibrant against the pristine white, felt like a desperate, almost frantic attempt to mask something older, colder, lurking beneath the surface. Clara's arrival wasn't a homecoming. It was a descent. This wasn't the picturesque holiday haven of childhood memory. This was a place holding its breath, waiting. The silence hummed with an unsettling energy, a discordant note beneath the forced cheer. It burrowed into Clara, a creeping unease that resonated with the spectral whispers she'd carried since leaving. The Thompson house stood at the end of a snow-dusted lane, a sentinel against the encroaching woods. Garlands and wreaths adorned its aged facade, but they couldn't conceal the weariness in the slump of its roof, the skeletal branches of the ancient elm scraping against its clapboard like bony fingers. The front door resisted her touch, the groan of its hinges a sound of long disuse, of secrets kept within. Entering felt like an intrusion, a violation of some unspoken pact. Shadows clung to the corners of the rooms, dense and watchful. The air tasted of dust and something else, something ancient and faintly metallic, like the scent of old blood. The attic drew her, a magnetic pull towards the heart of the house's secrets. Beneath layers of forgotten belongings, moth-eaten quilts, and the ghosts of discarded dreams, she found it, a wooden box, its lid warped and splintered. Inside, nestled amongst yellowed lace and brittle photographs, a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. The paper crackled like dry leaves as she unfolded them. The ink faded, but the words sharp, etched with a desperation that transcended time. They spoke of strange occurrences, shadows moving in the periphery, whispers in the dead of night, a growing unease that mirrored her own. These weren't the mundane worries of everyday life. They were tinged with something otherworldly, something that chilled Clara to the bone. She lit a candle, its flickering flame casting dancing shadows that seemed to mimic the movements she'd read about in the letters. Each word penned by hands long gone whispered of a darkness that permeated this seemingly idyllic village, a darkness that Clara felt closing in. Seeking a respite from the oppressive atmosphere of the house, Clara ventured into the village's general store. The bell above the door jingled merrily, a jarring counterpoint to the unsettling quiet of the streets. The shelves were stocked with the mundane necessities of life, yet the air hung heavy with an unspoken tension. The townsfolk moved with a strange stillness, their smiles tight, their eyes guarded. They knew her, or at least they knew of her, their gazes carrying a weight of recognition that felt both familiar and deeply unsettling. An old woman, her face a roadmap of wrinkles, approached Clara, her eyes milky with age yet sharp with an unnerving intensity. A fleeting smile touched her lips, then vanished, replaced by an expression of grim knowing. "They haven't forgotten you, Clara," she rasped, her voice like dry leaves skittering across pavement. "They never forget." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning, a chilling premonition of what awaited her in Whispering Pines. Back at the Thompson house, the setting sun cast long, skeletal shadows across the snow-covered lawn. The unearthed letters lay spread out on the table, their contents a chilling testament to the secrets hidden within the walls of this seemingly peaceful village. The hearth, cold and empty for years, suddenly erupted in flames, a sudden burst of warmth that felt less like a welcome and more like a warning. Clara's gaze drifted towards the library, its silhouette stark against the twilight sky. It beckoned her, a repository of knowledge that might hold the key to understanding the unsettling truths she'd unearthed, the whispers that seemed to emanate from the very heart of Whispering Pines. The scent of pine and frost that clung to Clara's clothes felt like a shroud as she followed Jack's gaze towards the library. Its imposing silhouette against the bruised winter sky promised not sanctuary, but a deeper descent into Whispering Pines' chilling mysteries. The heavy oak doors, swollen with the damp, resisted her push, groaning like a crypt disturbed. Inside, the air was thick with the dust of ages, a stillness that vibrated with unspoken stories. Sunlight struggled to penetrate the grimy, arched windows, casting the cavernous space in a perpetual twilight. Rows upon rows of books stood like silent sentinels, their spines faded and cracked, whispering tales of forgotten lore. Clara felt a prickling unease, the sense of being observed by unseen eyes. Eli, however, seemed drawn in, his restless energy momentarily subdued by a strange reverence. He moved with an almost preternatural familiarity, his hand trailing along the spines as if searching for a specific, elusive volume. A figure emerged from the gloom, the librarian, a wisp of a woman with eyes that held the unsettling depth of ancient wells. She moved with an uncanny grace, her footsteps silent on the worn wooden floor. She led them through the labyrinthine stacks, the scent of old paper and mildew clinging to her like a second skin. They reached a small, secluded room at the back of the library, a space seemingly forgotten by time. Boxes overflowed with brittle documents, yellowed photographs, and journals bound in cracked leather. A single bare bulb cast a sickly yellow light, barely illuminating the cramped space. Clara felt the weight of the past pressing down on her, a suffocating blanket of forgotten grief and unresolved secrets. Eli, on the other hand, seemed energized, his eyes alight with a grim fascination. Clara began sifting through a stack of letters, their ink faded and bleeding into the fragile paper. Fragments of lives long past emerged, whispers of strange occurrences, unexplained illnesses, and unsettling dreams. Eli, meanwhile, was engrossed in a collection of old ledgers, his brow furrowed in concentration. He muttered under his breath, tracing lines of faded script with his fingertip. Names and dates began to coalesce, forming a disturbing pattern. Tragedy seemed to follow the Carter family like a persistent shadow, repeating itself across generations. Sudden deaths, mysterious disappearances, and whispers of madness echoed through the brittle pages. Clara felt a chill crawl up her spine, a premonition of something terrible lurking just beneath the surface. Eli's breathing grew shallow, his face pale and drawn. He had stumbled upon an account of a death, a tragic accident shrouded in rumor and speculation. The details were scant, but the emotional weight of the entry was palpable, a raw wound bleeding across time. The victim's name resonated with him, a ghostly echo from his own bloodline. A hidden door, concealed behind a towering bookshelf, revealed itself to their searching hands. It swung inward with a low groan, revealing a narrow, dust-choked staircase descending into darkness. An oppressive sense of foreboding emanated from the depths, a palpable wave of cold air washing over them. Hesitation flickered in Clara's eyes, but Eli's resolve was unshakable. He descended into the unknown, Clara close behind. The air grew heavy, the silence punctuated by the drip of water and the distant scuttling of unseen things. They found themselves in a subterranean chamber, lined with shelves filled with ancient, leather-bound volumes. The air was thick with the scent of decay and something else, something indefinably sinister. At the center of the room sat a heavy oak table, upon which lay a single book, its cover worn and blackened with age. Eli reached for it, his hand trembling. The book fell open to a page filled with spidery handwriting, detailing a ritual, a dark pact made generations ago. The words seemed to writhe on the page, their meaning twisting and shifting like shadows in the flickering lamplight. Eli's face contorted in a silent scream, the weight of his family's legacy crashing down upon him. He was not merely a descendant, but an inheritor, bound to a history steeped in darkness and despair. The festive lights of Whispering Pines seemed to mock them as they emerged from the library, their cheerful glow a stark contrast to the chilling truths they carried within. The town's facade of holiday cheer felt increasingly fragile, a thin veil over a festering wound. The air itself seemed to vibrate with an unseen energy, a growing sense of dread that permeated every cobblestone and shadowed alleyway. The storm was coming. Emerging from the library's oppressive silence, Clara and Eli stepped back into Whispering Pines, the village now cloaked in the deepening chill of twilight. The festive decorations, so cheerful by day, seemed to warp and twist in the fading light. A creeping unease settled upon them, a premonition that the unearthed secrets wouldn't remain buried. The very air seemed to thicken, pregnant with an unnatural stillness. This was no ordinary December evening. The cobblestones beneath their feet, dusted with a fine layer of frost, radiated an unnatural cold that seeped into their boots and up their legs. The street lamps, once beacons of warm welcome, now flickered erratically, casting long, distorted shadows that danced like grotesque puppets. Each flicker seemed to peel back another layer of the village's cheerful facade, revealing the creeping dread beneath. The joyful chime of Christmas bells, lingering faintly in the air, warped it to a discordant clang, a metallic shriek that echoed the growing unease. A sickly sweet scent, reminiscent of decaying pine needles and something faintly metallic, permeated the air. The vibrant hues of the Christmas lights, once so festive, now pulsed with a malevolent glow, casting an eerie, otherworldly light upon the snow-covered streets. The mist rolling in from the surrounding woods clung to the ground, swallowing sound and distorting familiar shapes into monstrous silhouettes. Laughter, once a familiar sound echoing through the streets, was replaced by an unnerving silence, broken only by the whisper of the wind through the skeletal branches of the evergreens. Inside the homes, a similar transformation was taking place. The cheerful glow of fireplaces morphed into menacing pits of shadow, the crackling flames mimicking the whispers of unseen entities. Family portraits, hanging on the walls, seemed to twist and contort, their smiling faces morphing into sneering grimaces. The very walls seemed to breathe, exhaling an ancient, chilling air. Whispers, emanating from unknown sources, slithered through the rooms, weaving tales of dread and despair. The festive decorations, once symbols of joy and celebration, became grotesque parodies of themselves. Garlands, once vibrant with color, now hung limp and lifeless, their faded hues mirroring the decay that was slowly consuming the village. The frost on the window panes, once delicate patterns of winter wonder, now etched themselves into sinister runes, whispering prophecies of doom. Wreaths hanging on the doors, twisted into menacing visages, the evergreen boughs resembling the grasping claws of skeletal hands. The presence of the Yule haunts, once a subtle undercurrent, now became palpable, a suffocating weight pressing down on the village. Ghostly figures flitted at the edges of vision, their whispers weaving through the wind, promising torment and despair. The very fabric of reality seemed to fray, the line between the living and the dead blurring as the haunts asserted their dominion over Whispering Pines. Families huddled together, clinging to the remnants of warmth and sanity, but the fear was a tangible entity, seeping into their bones. Stories, once told to comfort and entertain, now echoed with the chilling truth of the village's haunted history. The Yule haunts were no longer just a legend. They were a terrifying reality, and their presence was growing stronger with each passing hour. The festive cheer was a thin veneer, barely concealing the horror beneath. As midnight approached, the village held its breath, bracing itself for the inevitable confrontation. The encroaching darkness promised not the gentle embrace of slumber, but a descent into a nightmare from which there might be no awakening. Clara, her mind reeling from the library's revelations, felt the weight of the village's fear pressing down on her. The box in the attic, the whispers of her grandmother's past, all seemed to converge in this moment of escalating dread. She knew, with a chilling certainty, that she was inextricably linked to the horrors unfolding in Whispering Pines. The unsettling shift in the village's festive cheer propelled Clara towards the attic, a space thick with the dust of forgotten seasons. The attic door, swollen with years of neglect, resisted her touch, groaning like a crypt disturbed. Inside, the air hung stagnant and heavy, the faint scent of mothballs a pathetic attempt to mask the deeper, more ancient odors of secrets and decay. Strips of moonlight, thin as razors, sliced through cracks in the boarded-up windows, illuminating motes of dust that swirled like tiny, restless spirits. Cobwebs, thick as shrouds, draped furniture and boxes, whispering of long years of undisturbed solitude. Clara's hand, trembling slightly, reached out to brush aside the sticky webbing that veiled a particularly ancient-looking box, its wood warped and blackened with age. It pulsed with an unsettling energy, a silent beacon in the otherwise dormant room. A premonition, cold and sharp, pricked at the edges of her awareness. This box held something vital, something that would unravel the carefully constructed facade of Whispering Pines. The box lid creaked open, releasing a musty aroma of aged paper and something akin to dried blood, a metallic tang that sent a shiver crawling up Clara's spine. Letters, tied with faded ribbons, lay nestled amongst yellowed photographs and brittle newspaper clippings. At the bottom, beneath a layer of tissue paper thin as a ghost's breath, lay a photo album, its leather cover cracked and peeling. Clara lifted the album, its weight surprising. As she opened it, the faces of her ancestors stared back at her, a silent procession of ghosts caught in the sepia tones of a bygone era. They seemed to watch her, their eyes holding a strange mixture of accusation and plea. Then she saw her, or rather a woman who could have been her twin, separated not by blood but by time. The woman's gaze held a haunting familiarity, a recognition that transcended the years. A cold dread seeped into Clara's bones, a chilling premonition that whispered of shared destinies and unspoken truths. The woman in the photograph was Sophia, her great-grandmother, a figure shrouded in family lore and whispered secrets. Clara felt a sudden, urgent need to understand, to connect the fragmented pieces of her family history. This face, this echo of herself, held the key to unlocking the mysteries that clung to whispering pines like a shroud. Driven by a newfound urgency, Clara descended the creaking stairs, the spectral chill of the attic clinging to her like a second skin. The warmth of the kitchen, with its familiar sense of baking bread and simmering spices, offered little comfort against the unsettling discovery she carried. Mara, her grandmother, stood by the stove, her back to Clara, her figure small and hunched. The rhythmic clinking of a spoon against the side of a pot, a sound usually comforting, now seemed to amplify the silence, creating a sense of anticipation that tightened the air. Clara approached, holding the photograph aloft, the sepia tones stark against the warm glow of the kitchen light. "Mara," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "I found something in the attic. I think it's connected to you." Mara turned, her face etched with a weariness that belied her age. Her eyes, usually bright and sharp, now held a flicker of fear, a momentary vulnerability that quickly hardened into a mask of indifference. Her gaze fell upon the photograph, and a shadow, swift and dark, crossed her features. It was the look of someone caught off guard, a glimpse behind the carefully constructed walls of a lifetime of secrets. Sophia. Mara's voice was barely a whisper, the name laced with a mixture of reverence and dread. "Your great-grandmother." The name hung in the air, heavy with unspoken history. Mara's carefully constructed composure began to crumble, replaced by a raw vulnerability that startled Clara. In that moment, the years separating them seemed to dissolve, replaced by a shared connection forged in the crucible of family secrets. Mara began to speak, her voice low and hesitant at first, then gaining momentum as the dam of years of silence finally broke. Stories of forbidden love, hidden identities, and whispered rebellions poured forth, painting a vivid tapestry of a life lived in the shadows. Sophia's image, once a static portrait, now pulsed with life, her defiant spirit resonating across the generations. Clara listened, mesmerized, the pieces of her family history clicking into place, forming a pattern that was both terrifying and exhilarating. She saw reflections of herself in Sophia's choices, in her unwavering determination to defy the constraints of tradition and expectation. As Mara spoke, the kitchen seemed to shrink, the walls closing in as the weight of their shared history pressed down on them. The comforting aromas of home now mingled with the scent of something ancient and unsettling, the lingering odor of secrets long buried. Clara's heart pounded against her ribs, a drumbeat echoing the frantic rhythm of her racing thoughts. The spectral chill from the attic returned, intensified, wrapping its icy fingers around her soul. The church bell tolled midnight, its somber clang echoing through the stillness, a stark reminder of the darkness that awaited them. The time for stories was over. The time for confrontation had arrived. The heavy oak door of St. Nicholas, swollen with the December cold, groaned like a dying man as Clara pushed it open. The scent of incense and dust, a perfume of forgotten prayers, clung to the frigid air. The hushed reverence of generations seemed trapped within the stone walls, a stark contrast to the turbulent emotions churning within her. Eli, his jaw tight, followed close behind, the faint glow of the streetlights painting his face with an unsettling pallor. He clutched a rusted iron candlestick, its single flame flickering like a fragile hope against the encroaching darkness. Inside, the church held its breath. Stained glass saints, their painted eyes magnified in the gloom, watched from the towering windows. Moonlight, fractured by the panes, splashed across the stone floor, painting a macabre mosaic. The air, thick and cold, crackled with an unseen energy, a palpable tension that prickled Clara's skin. She could almost feel the weight of unseen eyes upon them, the whispers of long-held grievances slithering through the silence. The pews, dark and empty, seemed to exhale the chill of centuries, each one a silent testament to lives lived and lost within these hallowed walls. A low, guttural moan echoed from the shadowed altar. It wasn't human, not entirely. It was a sound born of despair, a symphony of suffering that twisted the sacred air. From the darkness, they coalesced. The haunts, not merely shadows but tangible horrors, their forms shimmering like heat haze, their faces contorted in masks of eternal torment. Their eyes, burning embers in the gloom, fixed on Clara and Eli, a predatory hunger gleaming within their depths. The air grew colder, the scent of decay replacing the stale incense. One of the haunts, its form resembling a skeletal woman in a tattered wedding gown, glided towards Clara, its icy fingers outstretched. The spectral chill emanating from it burned Clara's skin like frostbite. She recoiled, instinctively clutching the locket. Its warmth, a small sun against the encroaching ice, strengthened her resolve. This was not just about her anymore. It was about the generations who had suffered under the haunt's malevolent reign. Eli moved, the candlestick held high, a beacon of defiance against the spectral tide. He thrust the flame towards the approaching haunt, and a shriek, like nails scraping across a chalkboard, tore through the silence. The spectral form recoiled, its edges flickering as if consumed by an unseen fire. This was not a battle of flesh and blood, but a clash of wills, a struggle against the very fabric of despair. The other haunts, their forms shifting and swirling like smoke, closed in. Whispers, laced with malice and sorrow, assaulted their ears, trying to pry open the cracks in their defenses to feed on their fear. Clara felt a wave of dizziness, the spectral voices weaving a tapestry of doubt and despair. But the locket pulsed against her skin, a steady rhythm against the chaotic symphony of the haunts, anchoring her to the present, to the purpose that had brought her here. She saw Eli battling two haunts at once, the candlestick a whirlwind of flickering light, his movements fueled by a primal rage, a desperate need to protect. He was no longer the lost athlete seeking redemption. He was a warrior, a guardian against the encroaching darkness. He stumbled, one of the haunts latching onto his arm, its icy grip searing his flesh. He cried out, the sound choked with pain. Clara knew she had to act. The locket. It was more than a trinket, more than a family heirloom. It was a key, a conduit to a power she was only beginning to understand. Closing her eyes, she focused on the warmth radiating from the locket, channeling the memories of her ancestors, their strength, their resilience. When she opened her eyes, the church was bathed in an ethereal glow emanating from the locket in her outstretched hand. The haunts recoiled, their forms dissolving, their wails turning into mournful sighs as the light washed over them. The oppressive chill lifted, the air becoming lighter, cleaner. Silence descended, a profound, peaceful silence, broken only by the soft crackling of the dying candle flame in Eli's hand. The battle was over. A faint shimmer remained on the floor where the haunts had stood, a spectral residue of their presence, a reminder of the darkness that had almost consumed them. But the darkness was receding, giving way to the first faint glimmer of dawn filtering through the stained glass windows, painting the church in hues of hope and renewal. The echoes of the spectral wails still clung to the rafters, a fading dissonance in the sudden, heavy quiet. Dust motes, disturbed by the recent struggle, drifted in the shafts of moonlight filtering through the stained glass windows, illuminating the church in an ethereal, otherworldly glow. Clara, her breath catching in ragged gasps, clutched the locket, its surface now cool against her skin. The thrumming that had vibrated through her during the confrontation subsided, leaving a hollowness, an absence where fear and adrenaline had pulsed. Eli stood beside her, shoulders slumped, the tension slowly draining from his frame like water from a breached dam. The air, thick moments before with the presence of the Yule haunts, felt thin and brittle, cleansed, yet somehow more fragile. The figure of Christ, eternally poised above the altar, seemed to gaze down with an almost palpable compassion. The shadows that had writhed and danced during the struggle now retreated into the corners, clinging to the edges of the pews like shy, reluctant things. The scent of burnt incense, a ghostly reminder of prayers long past, mingled with a metallic tang of fear that still lingered in Clara's nostrils. "It's over," she whispered, the words barely audible in the vastness of the church. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, not a tear of sadness, but of exhaustion, relief, and the chilling weight of what they had just witnessed. A strand of hair, plastered to her forehead with the remnants of the spectral mist, seemed a tangible mark of the ordeal, a badge of courage earned in the face of unimaginable terror. Eli nodded, his gaze fixed on the faint shimmer that dusted the floor where the Yule haunts had stood. "The locket," he murmured, his voice hoarse. "It worked." The hope that flickered in his eyes was a fragile ember in the vast darkness of the church, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. They moved towards the altar, the silence amplifying the soft click of their heels against the stone floor. The shimmer beneath their feet was like the residue of a dream, a fleeting glimpse into a realm just beyond perception. Clara felt a pang of something akin to sadness for the tormented spirits, their anguish now silenced, their stories finally told. The church felt different, lighter somehow. The weight of centuries of sorrow seemed to lift from the very stones. They gathered themselves, the silence holding them in a shared, unspoken understanding. The covenant was fulfilled. But in the depths of the ancient stone, a faint tremor persisted, a subtle vibration that whispered of a history not entirely erased, a reminder of the darkness that still lurked at the edges of reality. Stepping out into the pre-dawn chill, Clara paused, the crisp air a welcome shock to her system. Snow fell softly, each flake a tiny, perfect crystal, transforming the village into a scene of pristine, untouched beauty. The shadows had retreated, and the first hint of dawn painted the eastern sky in hues of pale rose and lavender. Whispering pines lay still and silent, a world reborn in the hush of a new beginning. The church stood sentinel behind them, its dark silhouette a stark contrast against the emerging light. It held the secrets of their midnight struggle, a silent testament to the courage they had found within themselves. The locket, now warm against Clara's skin, pulsed with a gentle, reassuring rhythm. The curse was broken, the village freed, and they had emerged from the darkness, forever changed by the shadows they had faced. Hand in hand, they walked towards the rising sun, leaving behind the ghosts of whispering pines and stepping into the light of a new day. The Victorian mansion clawed at the inky December sky, an obsidian behemoth against the swirling snow. Its antiquated majesty, a stubborn defiance of time and season, sent a shiver down Emma Carter's spine. Wind howled a mournful dirge around the eaves, packing drifts against the skeletal branches of overgrown shrubbery. The long drive, a ribbon of frozen black ice, snaked through a desolate landscape towards the house. Emma paused at the edge of this treacherous path, suitcase clutched in a white-knuckled grip. The mansion's solemn facade held her captive. Shadows clung to the aged stone like cobwebs, whispering an unspeakable secret she felt compelled to hear. 27 years had passed since Emma last stood on this ground, before her grandmother's sanctuary. Years had blurred in a frenetic rush, but now, facing the grand edifice, she felt a chilling regression, as if 6 years old again, poised at the edge of a forbidden world. Each breath, a wisp of vapor in the frigid air, mirrored the icy, uneased churning in her stomach. The mansion's stark elegance was a challenge, a silent air. She felt dwarfed by its oppressive grandeur, a fleeting, insignificant speck against something monumental, immortal. Grotesque gargoyles, perched like sentinels flanking the heavy oak doors, stared down with expressions of frozen vigilance. Years of frost and weathering had etched themselves into the stone, giving their chiseled features an unsettling air of contemplation. They guarded the secrets carried on the wind, whispers passed from generation to generation. Emma hesitated, keys cold against her palm, daring the gargoyles to challenge her right to enter. She inserted the key into the lock, the click echoing in the vast stillness. The heavy door swung inward, revealing a maw of darkness. The moment she crossed the threshold, the mansion inhaled her. The air hung heavy with the scent of dust and decay, tinged with the phantom fragrance of long-dead flowers, a perfume of forgotten lives. Velvet drapes, thick and heavy, smothered the windows, muffling the world outside, imprisoning the house in a suffocating silence. Portraits lined the paneled walls, their eyes following her every move, silent witnesses to past revelries and whispered indiscretions. Each canvas seemed to assess her, judging her intentions. The house itself breathed, a low murmur that wove together the tapestry of bygone years, a narrative of joy and sorrow, life and death, and something else, something unspoken. Her footsteps echoed in the cavernous vestibule, each creak of the floorboards a peculiar crescendo beneath the soaring ceiling. The sounds resonated in the hushed space, speaking a language she couldn't quite grasp, whispers of anguish and fleeting moments of joy. Her fingertips grazed the smooth, lacquered surface of the banister as she ascended the grand staircase, a physical connection to countless hands that had gone before. She felt like a custodian in a museum of forgotten relics, entrusted with stories she hadn't yet earned the right to know. Alone, the word echoed in the vast emptiness. She was a solitary figure engulfed by phantoms, each breath a whisper of her isolation in this world of spectral captivation. Instinct told her this was the sanctuary she sought, a place to confront her own disquiet. Yet, the mansion seemed to reject her pretense of tranquility. Every inch of the house pulsed with memories, swirling and coalescing in the silent air, filling the void with the echoes of lives lived and lost. The very thought that fragments of consciousness, spirits tethered to these walls, might linger, offered a terrifying comfort. She moved through the oppressive stillness, her hand trailing along the aged floral wallpaper, tracing the contours of its faded pattern. It felt like a chronicle etched in the very fabric of the house, a story of life, death, celebration, and despair. In the dining room, the table was set, an eerie tableau awaiting guests from another epoch. The antique clock on the mantelpiece ticked away the seconds, its rhythm at odds with the frantic beat of her own heart. In the parlor, beneath the opulent chandelier casting a nimbus of light, the enormity of the mansion's loneliness settled upon her like a shroud. As the grandfather clock in the hall chimed midnight, announcing the arrival of Christmas with a crisp, resonant toll, a whisper of a name, Ethan, brushed against her consciousness, an echo of youthful laughter and a bittersweet pang of longing. It was a memory dredged from the depths of her past, an unwelcome guest in the unsettling quiet. A shiver ran down her spine, and the atmosphere around her seemed to tighten, a chilling, unknown presence making itself known. Drawn by the flickering glow of the fire in the hearth, she sank into the plush embrace of a settee, seeking solace in its warmth. The flames danced, casting ephemeral shadows that writhed and shifted like spectral figures, their fleshy hues weaving into the very dimensions of the room. Alone, but not entirely, she closed her eyes, searching for a sense of peace, but her past, tangible and insistent, echoed in her waking dreams. The lingering resonance of the Christmas bells seemed to hold time captive, stirring echoes of something beyond the physical world. As the vibrations faded into a whispering silence, a fragile illusion of peace settled over the room. But beneath the surface, a palpable energy, the very breath of the mansion, flowed against the current of her presence. It was a whisper across the epochs, a reminder that within these hallowed halls, her spirit was never truly alone. Gazing into the embers, a new perception began to dawn. Within the solitude, a doorway was opening, a precursor to transdimensional revelations waiting to be understood. The oppressive stillness, pregnant with untold stories, pressed in on her, a prelude to the unsettling phenomena that would soon begin to unravel the fragile tapestry of the night. The mansion's oppressive silence, once a comfort against the howling wind, began to warp, to fester. Dusk bled through the tall windows, painting the dust motes dancing in the air a spectral gray. Emma, nestled in the unsettling stillness of the grand foyer, felt a prickle on her skin, not from cold, but from a creeping awareness. The shadows themselves seemed to deepen, coalescing in the corners, hinting at forms just beyond perception. An unspoken narrative, woven from the very fabric of the house, began to unfurl around her. The drawing room, once elegant, now felt charged, the air thick with an unnatural chill. It emanated from the floorboards, a glacial breath seeping through the polished oak. Not just cold, but ancient, the exhalation of something long buried beneath. Shadows danced in the far corners, no longer mere absence of light, but animate things, their movements distorted, almost mocking. Emma hugged herself, breath catching in her throat, a sudden, inexplicable fear blooming in her chest. The Very would seem to watch her, the intricate carvings twisting into accusatory eyes. A subtle current of air, deceptively gentle, snaked through the room, weaving between her fingers, raising gooseflesh on her arms. It carried the scent of dust and decay, subtly masked by the faintest trace of dried flowers, a cloying sweetness that bordered on nauseating. The breeze, an unseen hand, guided her toward the library, the double doors slightly ajar, a silent invitation. Inside, the air thrummed with a low hum, the whisper of turning pages from a book no living hand touched. The shadows here were deeper, more defined, clinging to the towering shelves like spectral guardians. The musty scent of aged paper, of leather and forgotten knowledge, filled her nostrils, tinged with the same unsettling sweetness from the drawing room. The grand hall stretched before her, cavernous and echoing. Each footfall was amplified, swallowed by the oppressive silence, then returned as a ghostly reverberation. It wasn't just the echo of her own steps, but a chorus of others, the faint rustle of unseen gowns, the murmur of conversations long past. The air was heavy, not with dust, but with the weight of centuries, of lives lived and lost within these walls. Joyous laughter, whispered secrets, anguished cries, all trapped within the whispering plaster, waiting to be unearthed. A sudden groan echoed from a shadowed corridor, a door protesting its forced slumber. The sound, laden with both joy and sorrow, sent a shiver down Emma's spine. A palpable sense of dread settled in her chest, a warning whispering in her blood. She felt a presence there, in the suffocating darkness, something watching, waiting. Invisible eyes, patient and ancient, seemed to follow her as she retreated, a primal fear urging her away. She stumbled into a smaller room, seeking refuge. A faded portrait, hanging askew on the wall, snared her attention. The woman in the painting, her face obscured by grime and time, stared back with an unnerving familiarity. Emma's blood ran cold, a strange recognition pulling at her. It was a face from a half-forgotten dream, a whisper on the edge of memory. Her reflection in the glass, superimposed over the painted visage, created a grotesque parody of herself, her fear mirrored in the woman's vacant eyes. The room held its breath, silent and expectant. The faintest of sounds, a scratching just beyond the threshold of hearing, suggested movement, something shifting in the darkness just beyond her sight. The cloying sweetness returned, stronger now, suffocating. It coiled around her, clinging to her clothes, her hair, invading her senses. The mansion was alive, breathing its secrets into her, weaving a tapestry of dread beneath her skin. This wasn't just a house. It was a sentient being, and she was trapped within its web. The revelation settled upon her, heavy and inescapable, as the porcelain night cracked under the weight of the mansion's awakening. The library door, ajar as if in perpetual invitation, seemed to exhale a breath of cold air as Elizabeth approached. The unsettling whisper she'd heard earlier, those disembodied murmurs clinging to the edges of silence, now intensified, coalescing into a chilling premonition. She pushed the door inward, the hinges groaning a mournful protest, and stepped into a space where the very dust motes seemed to hang suspended in a spectral expectancy. The air, thick with the scent of decay and forgotten knowledge, pressed against her like a shroud. She could almost taste the bitterness of bygone hopes, the lingering tang of secrets clinging to the spines of leather-bound tomes. A yawning corridor stretched before her, the decrepit walls seeming to lean inward, their shadowed surfaces alive with an unsettling movement. An involuntary shudder traced a path down her spine. The floorboards groaned beneath her weight, each creak a mournful harmony to the frantic drumming of her heart. The shadows writhed and danced, serpentine figures flickering just beyond her grasp, promising glimpses of something unseen, something malevolent. She felt their presence, spectral entities gliding alongside her, intangible yet suffocating, pressing against the confines of her mind. Unseen eyes bore into her, a weight of judgment and expectation that made her breath catch in her throat. They seemed to assess her, to weigh her worthiness to partake in the mansion's melancholic history. She pushed onward, her courage a fragile shield against the creeping dread that threatened to paralyze her. A grand portrait, its canvas riddled with the ravages of time and neglect, arrested her attention. The woman in the painting, her face obscured by layers of dust and shadow, seemed to lock eyes with Elizabeth. Her painted gaze, unsettlingly lifelike, was a portal to a desolate universe devoid of laughter and light. Elizabeth felt a strange pull, a compulsion to gaze deeper into those eyes, to understand the sorrow that emanated from them. As she stared, an uncanny sensation washed over her. Memories that weren't her own, fragments of a life she'd never lived, flooded her consciousness. A sharp pang of sorrow, a profound sense of loss, pierced her heart. It was as if the woman in the portrait was pouring her despair directly into Elizabeth's soul. A sudden gust of wind, cold and sharp, extinguished the flickering candlelight, plunging the corridor into an oppressive darkness. The darkness was not merely the absence of light. It was a tangible entity, heavy and suffocating, pulling her into an abyss of eternal night. Her breath came in ragged gasps, each inhalation tinged with a bitterness that seared her throat. The air, thick with the scent of dust and despair, chafed against her skin. The whispers intensified, a cacophony of dissonant voices coiling around her, relentless in their pursuit. Words she had never heard, syllables that seemed to defy human comprehension, fought to be recognized. They wove a narrative of sorrow, a tale of loss and despair that seeped into the cracks of her fortitude. Amidst the chaotic murmurings, a single name emerged: Margaret. The same name inscribed on a small, tarnished plaque beneath the dust-laden portrait. Margaret, the orchestrator of this spectral symphony. Drawn by an unseen force, Elizabeth found herself standing before a closed door she hadn't noticed before. Impossible memories, fragments of scenes she'd never witnessed, flickered in her mind's eye. A chill radiated from the other side of the door, seeping into her hand as she reached for the rusted knob. Her fingers, acting on their own accord, turned the handle with the inexorable pull of the tide. The darkness within seemed to coalesce, a living entity waiting to be unleashed. Elizabeth hesitated, the cold metal of the doorknob biting into her skin. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that what lay beyond that door was not meant for human eyes. Yet, an irresistible force compelled her forward. She pushed the door open and stepped into the suffocating darkness of the sitting room. The diary's final entry, Margaret's desperate plea echoing the mansion's own sorrow, settled heavily in Elizabeth's mind. She closed the book, the whisper of its aged pages a sigh against the oppressive quiet of the room. The shadows seemed to deepen, pressing in on her, the silence no longer empty, but thick with an unseen presence. She needed to move, to escape the suffocating stillness of the room that held Margaret's last words. She descended the grand staircase, each footfall a hesitant echo in the cavernous space, and found herself drawn to the sitting room, a place where a flicker of dying embers in the hearth offered a fragile defense against the encroaching darkness. The weak light from her laptop cast a sickly yellow glow across the worn furniture, barely penetrating the shadows that clung to the corners like cobwebs. The chill in the air had intensified, no longer just a cold draft, but a palpable presence, settling on her skin like a shroud. The ornate carvings on the high-backed chairs seemed to writhe in the periphery of her vision, transforming into grotesque faces that watched her with malevolent amusement. The air grew thick, each breath an effort, the silence pressing down on her with the weight of centuries of unspoken grief. A distorted reflection rippled across her laptop screen. Not her own, but a fleeting glimpse of something else. A hunched figure, impossibly tall and thin, lurking just beyond the edge of the light. Her heart leaped into her throat. She spun around, the chair scraping against the wooden floor, a jarring sound in the suffocating quiet. Nothing, only shadows, deeper now, and the oppressive weight of the unseen. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced the fragile shield she'd built around herself. It wasn't just the shadows or the imagined shapes in the corners. Something was here, something malevolent, feeding on the mansion's sorrow, and now, on her fear. The air grew viscous, clinging to her skin like icy fingers. She could feel it, a breath against the back of her neck, the whisper of a voice too close to her ear to be real. The room seemed to breathe around her, exhaling a chilling mist that smelled of decay and dust. A low growl resonated from the walls, a sound that vibrated through the very floorboards, shaking the fragile piece she clung to. Objects shifted, unseen hands brushing against furniture, the faint rustle of fabric whispering tales she couldn't comprehend. This was not the spectral whisper of Margaret's diary. This was something tangible, something that wanted her to know it was there. A book tumbled from a nearby shelf, landing with a thud that echoed through the room. She jumped, her breath catching in her throat. Slowly, she turned towards the fallen book. A single, skeletal hand, bone-white and impossibly long, reached out from the shadows beneath the shelf, its fingers twitching as if reaching for her. It lingered, suspended in the dim light, an accusation and a promise. Then, with agonizing slowness, it retreated back into the darkness, leaving behind a silence even more terrifying than the sounds that had preceded it. Elizabeth's mind raced. Margaret's fragmented memories, the whispers in the shadows, the chilling presence now made manifest. It all pointed to a darkness within the mansion far deeper than she had imagined. She needed answers, a way to understand the horrors that unfolded within these walls. The attic, the repository of forgotten relics and untold secrets, beckoned. Driven by a desperate need to comprehend, to find some semblance of control in the face of escalating terror, she fled the sitting room, the skeletal hands seared into her memory, and began her ascent towards the attic, the unknown horrors that held a terrifying but necessary next step. The unsettling quiet of the sitting room, thick with unseen eyes and the phantom touch of icy fingers, propelled Elizabeth towards escape. She fled the suffocating darkness, the laptop's weak glow a pathetic shield against the encroaching shadows, and stumbled up the creaking stairs. Each groan of the wood was a mournful sigh, a prelude to the attic's suffocating secrets. The attic door, warped and scarred by time and neglect, resisted her touch. Finally, it yielded with a tortured shriek, releasing a gust of stale, musty air, the exhalation of forgotten things. The single bare bulb hanging precariously from a rafter cast a jaundiced light, barely penetrating the oppressive gloom. Dust motes, disturbed by her intrusion, swirled in the stagnant air, creating ephemeral constellations in the weak illumination. The attic wasn't merely filled with the debris of discarded lives. It felt choked by it. Cobwebs, thick as shrouds, clung to her face and hair, each strand a ghostly fingertip tracing the outline of her fear. The air tasted of decay, of memories turned to dust and regret. It pressed down on her, heavy and suffocating, whispering of secrets best left undisturbed. A carved wooden trunk, nestled amongst the detritus, caught her eye. Its dark wood, intricately carved with intertwining vines and forgotten symbols, seemed to pulse with a faint inner light. Drawn by an unseen force, Elizabeth approached, her hand trembling as she reached for the tarnished brass latch. Beneath the lid, layers of yellowed silk whispered against each other, revealing glimpses of vibrant colors beneath. She lifted a gown, a cascade of sapphire blue silk, its texture surprisingly smooth against her skin. The fabric held the faintest scent of lavender, and something else, something indefinably sweet and unsettling. Holding it, Elizabeth felt a strange warmth bloom in her chest, a disconcerting sense of familiarity, as though the gown recognized her touch. Beside the gown, nestled amongst the folds of silk, lay a letter, its paper brittle with age, the ink faded but still legible. The words, penned in a delicate cursive script, spoke of a love both passionate and tragic. A love story intertwined with the very fabric of the mansion. A love that bloomed and withered within these very walls. The writer, another Elizabeth, poured her heart onto the page, each word a tear shed onto the parchment, each sentence a whispered confession. As she read, the younger Elizabeth felt a chilling kinship with her namesake, a shared sorrow that transcended time, a bond forged in the crucible of unspoken grief. A shrouded mirror stood in a far corner, its surface obscured by a thick layer of dust and decay. Hesitantly, Elizabeth reached out, her fingers tracing the outline of the ornate frame beneath the grime. With a slow, deliberate pull, she drew the shroud away. The glass, dulled by neglect, shimmered strangely, reflecting not her own image but flickering scenes from a forgotten past. A child, his face alive with laughter, chased a woman with flowing dark hair through sun-drenched gardens. Their joy, so vibrant and real, sent a shiver down Elizabeth's spine, a stark contrast to the oppressive silence of the attic. Then, as quickly as it appeared, the image faded, replaced by the reflection of a woman's face, her eyes wide with terror, her mouth contorted in a silent scream. Elizabeth stumbled back, her heart pounding against her ribs. The mirror, a portal to the past, had shown her glimpses of lives lived and lost, of joy and terror intertwined. The attic, she realized, wasn't just a repository of discarded objects. It was a repository of discarded lives, of hopes and dreams turned to dust. The gown, the letter, the mirror, they were not just relics of the past. They were keys, unlocking the secrets of the mansion, revealing the heart of its darkness. The mansion was a living entity, its walls steeped in sorrow, its very foundation built on the bones of broken dreams. And Elizabeth, drawn into its web of secrets, was now inextricably bound to its fate. The oppressive weight of the attic's revelations settled upon her, a suffocating premonition of the truth that lay buried beneath the surface of the mansion's carefully constructed facade. The chilling certainty of an unspeakable tragedy resonated within her, a prelude to the dark narrative that awaited her in the depths of the house. The attic's chill clung to Elizabeth like a shroud as she descended the stairs, the whispers of forgotten lives echoing in her wake. The letter, fragile and yellowed, nestled in her hand, a tangible link to the spectral sorrow she now carried within her. The trunk, a silent sentinel in the dust-laden gloom, seemed to exhale the weight of its secrets as she closed the lid, leaving the spectral blue dress undisturbed in its silken slumber. This house breathed its history, and she was inhaling every particle. It was time to understand its sorrow, to give voice to the whispers. The mansion, cloaked in the encroaching twilight, exhaled the ghosts of its past. It stood sentinel amongst the whispering woods, its darkened windows like eyes staring into the abyss of forgotten memories. Long shadows stretched across the overgrown lawn, mimicking the tendrils of grief that had seeped into the very foundations. This wasn't just a house. It was a mausoleum of heartbreak, its stones whispering the lamentations of Eleanor, a woman whose spirit clung to the corridors like cobwebs, her essence woven into the very fabric of the decaying grandeur. There was a time, long ago, when laughter echoed within these walls. The mansion then pulsed with life, a beacon of elegance in a world poised on the precipice of tumultuous change. Eleanor, mistress of this domain, moved through its sunlit rooms with a grace that belied a deep, abiding sadness. Her smile, a carefully constructed facade, held back the encroaching darkness, a fragile shield against the whispers that even then snaked through the corridors. The mid-20th century buzzed within the mansion's walls. Children's laughter, bright and untainted, filled the air. Robert, Eleanor's son, possessed an imagination that transformed the mundane into magical realms. The grand staircase became a mountain, the drawing room a king's court. His laughter, pure and unrestrained, was the melody that filled Eleanor's world, a lifeline in a sea of societal expectations and hushed anxieties. A subtle tension permeated the household, an unspoken disquiet hidden beneath layers of forced gaiety. The adults, prisoners of their era, performed for an unseen audience, their smiles brittle masks hiding a creeping unease. Eleanor, trapped in a gilded cage of her own making, felt the tendrils of isolation tightening around her. Her husband, distant and preoccupied with the weight of his family's legacy, drifted further away, his affections a mirage shimmering on the horizon. Only Robert, with his boundless energy and vibrant spirit, anchored her to the world. Whispers slithered through the town like insidious vines, tales of the mansion's dark heart, of curses whispered within its stone belly. Strange occurrences, unexplained and unsettling, fueled the rumors, transforming murmurs into hushed pronouncements of a family cursed, a house built on tainted land. Within the mansion's walls, however, the family clung to the illusion of normalcy, their smiles a desperate defense against the encroaching darkness. One crisp autumn afternoon, under a sky the color of bruised peaches, tragedy struck. Robert vanished. One moment he was there, his laughter echoing in the hallway, the next an empty silence. The mansion, a silent witness to generations of joy and sorrow, offered no answers, its walls holding their secrets close. The disappearance was as sudden and inexplicable as a breath stolen in the night. No trace of the boy remained, no clue to his fate. A storm of grief descended upon Eleanor, tearing at her sanity, ripping through the carefully constructed facade. She became a ghost in her own home, haunting the corridors, her cries echoing through the empty rooms. Every shadow held the promise of her son, every creak of the floorboards the echo of his footsteps. She searched relentlessly, driven by a desperate hope that refused to be extinguished, her sanity fraying with each passing day. Her husband, stoic and withdrawn, retreated further into himself, his grief a silent, impenetrable wall. He accepted the loss, the finality of it, a resignation that Eleanor fought against with a ferocity born of a mother's unwavering love. The night stretched into an eternity of searching, of whispered prayers and silent tears. The mansion, ancient and impassive, absorbed her grief, a silent witness to another tragedy unfolding within its walls. Eleanor's sorrow seeped into the very foundations, her cries echoing in the empty halls, becoming part of the mansion's DNA. Time warped and twisted around her, her grief a shroud that enveloped the house, transforming it into a monument to her loss. She became the mansion, the house her eternal prison, a testament to her unending vigil, her desperate hope that one day her son would return. Her spirit, tethered to the mansion, reached out to those who dared to enter its shadowed embrace. Elizabeth, drawn into the house's mysteries, became the vessel for Eleanor's anguish, a conduit for the whispers trapped within the walls. The echoes of the past reached out to her, revealing the deep, abiding sorrow that bound Eleanor to this place, the unending search for a lost son, a love that transcended time and death. Elizabeth, cradled in the mansion's unfolding secrets, became the key, a fragile hope that the mansion's long-held grief might finally find release. Eleanor's anguish, a palpable entity, clung to the very air Elizabeth breathed. The revelation of the lost child, Robert, resonated deep within her, a chilling echo reverberating through the mansion's desolate chambers. Elizabeth, no longer a mere visitor, felt an inexplicable kinship with these spectral inhabitants, a shared sorrow that transcended time. A silent promise formed within her, to understand, to acknowledge, to offer solace to these trapped souls. Her footsteps, measured and deliberate, carried her deeper into the mansion's heart. Dusk bled through the tall windows, staining the dust motes dancing in the fading light a morbid crimson. The grand halls, once oppressive in their silence, now whispered secrets to her attuned ear. Each creak of the floorboards, each rustle of unseen fabric, spoke of lives lived and lost within these walls. The turret room, perched high atop the mansion like a forgotten sentinel, beckoned her. The scent of aged pine and decay permeated the air, mingling with the faint, sweet aroma of Eleanor's lavender perfume, a ghostly fragrance clinging to the faded tapestries. There, amidst the cobwebs and shadows, she saw him. Robert, a spectral wisp of a boy, his laughter echoing faintly, a melody of joy frozen in time. He chased dust motes in the dying light, his translucent form shimmering like heat haze. Elizabeth's heart ached. She saw not a ghost, but a child robbed of his future, his spirit tethered to this place by the unyielding grief of his mother. Eleanor's despair, a suffocating presence, filled the room, pressing against Elizabeth like icy fingers. She understood then the depth of Eleanor's pain, the eternal torment of a mother who had lost her child. It was a grief so profound, so raw, that it had seeped into the very foundations of the mansion, staining its soul. An overwhelming need to comfort, to heal, flooded Elizabeth. She spoke to Robert, her voice soft, a lullaby in the stillness. She acknowledged his presence, his joy, his stolen life. She spoke to Eleanor, too, whispering words of understanding, of shared sorrow. As Elizabeth's empathy flowed through the room, a subtle shift occurred. The oppressive weight of Eleanor's grief seemed to lessen, the shadows receding slightly, replaced by a faint, ethereal luminescence. Robert's laughter, though still tinged with sorrow, gained a new resonance, a hint of peace. The change, however subtle, rippled through the mansion. In the dining room, the spectral figures seated around the long table seemed to brighten, their ethereal forms less defined by sorrow, more by the warmth of shared memories. The faint clinking of unseen glasses, the murmur of ghostly conversations, replaced the oppressive silence. In the parlor, the ghostly strains of a forgotten melody drifted from the untouched piano. A couple, their spectral forms shimmering in the twilight, danced slowly, their movements graceful, their expression serene. The oppressive weight of longing that had permeated the room began to dissipate, replaced by an air of quiet contentment. The mansion, stirred by Elizabeth's empathy, began to exhale. The heavy, suffocating atmosphere lifted, replaced by a sense of lightness, of release. The shadows, once menacing and oppressive, retreated, revealing the beauty hidden beneath layers of grief and decay. Elizabeth continued her journey through the mansion, her presence a beacon of comfort and understanding. In the sewing room, she saw the ghostly figure of a woman bent over a half-finished gown, her spectral fingers moving nimbly with needle and thread. Elizabeth acknowledged her presence, her skill, her dedication. The woman looked up, a faint smile gracing her ethereal features. As midnight approached, a profound sense of peace settled over the mansion. The ghosts, no longer trapped by their sorrow, began to fade, their forms dissolving into the moonlight that streamed through the tall windows. The mansion, cleansed by Elizabeth's empathy, stood silent and still, its long vigil finally over. Elizabeth stood at the heart of it all, a a silent guardian of memory. The mansion, no longer a prison of sorrow, had become a sanctuary of peace, a testament to the enduring power of empathy and understanding. The chime of midnight, a resonant toll that had once heralded a spectral Christmas, now faded into the hushed expectancy of a new dawn. Elizabeth lingered in the stillness, the mansion's breath warm against her skin, a stark contrast to the icy grip it had held before. No longer a place of chilling whispers, the halls exhaled a gentle murmur of peace. She moved from the turret room, her heart echoing the rhythm of Robert's ghostly laughter, the memory a tangible presence in the quiet air. Elizabeth stood at the mansion's heart, oak floors cold beneath her slippered feet. The shadows, once menacing claws, now clung to the walls like shy children, reluctant to retreat entirely. They pulsed with the soft murmur of forgotten voices, a chorus of stories yearning to be heard. Dust motes, illuminated by the faint moonlight filtering through the tall windows, danced like spectral fireflies, each a tiny spark of memory. She traced the outline of a faded floral pattern on the wall, her fingertips brushing against the residue of generations past. This wasn't a haunting, it was a communion. The echoing halls whispered invitations. Each room held its breath, a silent plea for acknowledgement. Elizabeth obliged, her steps measured and deliberate, a quiet procession through the mansion's slumbering heart. The spectral murmurs intensified, a low hum that resonated deep within her bones. She wasn't just walking through a house. She was traversing layers of time, each footfall a step deeper into the mansion's intricate, sorrowful history. The once haunting cadence, a dissonant symphony of fear, now resonated with a melancholic warmth. The chill remained, a subtle reminder of the sorrow etched into the very foundation, but it was now intertwined with a burgeoning sense of peace. Elizabeth, her senses attuned to the spectral vibrations, felt a profound connection to the mansion's soul. She had become a part of its narrative, a guardian weaving together the fragmented threads of its past. The mansion's heartbeat, a steady pulse of memory and longing, thrummed beneath her fingertips, a constant, reassuring presence. It was no longer simply a dwelling. It had become a living, breathing testament to the lives that had graced its halls, a symphony of sorrow, joy, remorse, and enduring hope. As Elizabeth's understanding deepened, a newfound mindfulness settled upon her. She moved through the rooms with reverence, her presence a balm to the restless spirits within. In the shadowed corners, where the past clung with agonizing tenacity, she offered solace, whispering acknowledgments that eased the mansion's burden. The oppressive weight of forgotten grief began to lift, replaced by a fragile sense of peace. Dreams, long confined within these walls, stirred and took flight, each spirit reaching toward a semblance of eternity, no longer suffocating in morose solitude. Elizabeth's presence was not an intrusion, but an act of healing. Her empathy, a gentle hand unraveling the knotted threads of neglect, binding the tattered fabric of time and history with vibrant awareness. The library, once a cavern of archaic desolation, felt different now. The musty scent of aging paper and leather no longer spoke of decay, but of preserved memories. Moonlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny, ethereal spirits. Elizabeth reached out, her fingers tracing the spines of ancient volumes. The shadows that clung to the bookshelves recoiled, replaced by a gentle luminescence, as if the stories within were exhaling a sigh of relief. The ghosts that had long haunted these shelves, tethered to their tragic ends, now flickered at the edges of perception, playful and free, their denouements gently laid to rest in the soft light of Elizabeth's compassion. The silence was no longer oppressive but contemplative, filled with the quiet rustle of turning pages and the soft whispers of shared stories. Understanding blossomed within Elizabeth, a poignant recognition of the delicate balance between past and present. It wasn't about erasing the past or banishing the spirits that resided within the mansion's walls. It was about acknowledging their stories, giving voice to their silent pleas. She was not an exorcist, but a conduit, a channel through which the past could flow into the present, enriching and informing the future. She became the dance of memory and reality, an ever-turning lens that reconciled time's fractured elements, allowing the mansion's spectral inhabitants to glimpse their place within the endless progression, freed from the fetters of their unfinished narratives. The drawing room, bathed in the amber hues of twilight, held a stillness that no longer felt oppressive but expectant. Elizabeth paused, feeling the weight of her journey settle upon her shoulders. This was not a fleeting visit, but a profound transition, a passage in a guardianship. She had become the keeper of the mansion's secrets, the custodian of its fragile heart. The shadows that clung to the edges of the room trembled, not with fear, but with anticipation. They had found a voice in Elizabeth, a compassionate ear that listened to their whispered lamentations and offered solace in return. The air, once thick with unspoken grief, now vibrated with a burgeoning sense of peace, a fragile harmony woven from threads of memory and understanding. Elizabeth understood. She was not merely a visitor, a temporary resident within the mansion's aged walls. She was the bridge between its past and its future, the guardian of its stories, the keeper of its heart. Her role was not to erase the past, but to embrace it, to give voice to the silenced whispers, to offer solace to the restless spirits who wandered its halls. The mansion, once a prison of sorrow, had become a sanctuary, a place where memories could be cherished, where ghosts could find peace, and where the past and the present could finally coexist in harmonious balance. She was the silent guardian of memory, and the mansion, in all its spectral glory, was now her sacred trust.